You know, one of the things I think we need to be thinking about, particularly as we have these national conversations about Medicare for all, which hopefully will become in some form a law of the land at some point soon. But even if we find the day, create the day is a better way to put it, even if we create the day when every person in this country has access to medical care, there's yet another obstacle to improving the health of the population, and that's making sure that people avail themselves of the health care that's available to them. Now, one of the things that prevents people from getting the health care they need sometimes is pseudoscience. And there are varieties of pseudoscience in the medical care field, and we're about to talk about that with our next guest, and particularly the pseudoscience around vaccines. MarkAlain Dery is a personal friend. He is an infectious diseases physician and a professor at the medical school at Tulane University. He is also the founder of WHIV Radio in New Orleans, which is our New Orleans affiliate. He's here in Washington, D.C. on business, and we're delighted that he was able to stop by our studio, We Act Studios here in Anacostia in Washington, D.C., and talk to us. So first of all, MarkAlain, welcome, and it's great to see you.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Secondly, let's talk about the pseudoscience surrounding vaccines. Is this, you know, I think most people, certainly who listen to this show, have probably heard something about it. They've heard about celebrities, Jenny McCarthy or whomever, saying that vaccines are bad or that they cause autism or whatever. Is this something that's just like a celebrity kink that we don't need to worry about? It's just something like a glossy magazine story? Or is it actually something that endangers people's health?
Oh, there's no question that it endangers people's health. And the folks that actually subscribe to this pseudoscience is very interesting, and certainly we'll get to that in a quick second. But what we're seeing is really, again, another unprecedented outbreak of measles that's really taking hold in multiple states around the country, as well as multiple countries around the globe as well. And they're all rooted in the same thing. The vaccine itself, which is typically given over 3 doses, but even 2 doses, provides something like 98% protection from the virus that causes measles. And we're seeing a global-wide, again, multiple countries around the world and multiple states, something like 19 states in the country that are seeing this a major uptick of measles outbreak, all because people are not getting vaccinated.
And people aren't getting vaccinated because of these stories they've heard that have been promoted by celebrities and others, because they believe that the measles vaccine is somehow harmful, and maybe even a conspiracy, or what exactly
all
is
the above?
Yeah,
I mean, really, quite literally, all the above. I mean, the conspiracy we have seen in different parts of the world, and that's actually really quite sad. And maybe we'll talk about that in a second. But here in the U.S., what we're seeing is a lot of misinformation that's being disseminated through social media. And so we're seeing as we're filming this today, we've seen this week a commitment from social media services as well as streaming services to now remove these anti-vaccine messaging, posts, or movies or faux documentaries about the harms of vaccines, which doesn't exist. And also, let me say, this week that we are recording this, yet another major study, a 10-year study, again showing that the MMR, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, does not cause autism. And in fact, in a weird way, it actually had a protective effect toward autism. I don't think that was what the researchers had obviously intended to set out to do, but there was actually a protective effect. Again, not showing any sort of causal link. I think it was just the statistical, that's just kind of the way that it just, the statistics moved in that direction. But essentially, again, we are not seeing we're not seeing any link. We've never seen a link. And in the original, I think it was a Lancet article in the late 70s that has long since been retracted, and I'm not going to say the gastroenterologist's name, but that particular physician who kind of unleashed this genie out into the world, that was the paper that, again, had been retracted. All the physicians and everybody that had also been on that paper have long since removed themselves and isolated themselves from that original paper. But what happened as a result of that has kind of unleashed out into the world this potential consideration that doesn't exist, that vaccines may be somewhat harmful. And that's really what we're seeing. And then you add...
And this, by the way, just to interrupt, if I recall correctly, and maybe I don't, but the same physician then went on to hire himself out as an expert witness in defense cases. It's the same person.
So, yeah.
So, I mean, there's something, since we're not naming him, my personal impression is that the guy had or has a screw loose of some kind, and which would be fine if he were a harmless crank, but he's a danger. He's caused serious harm to many people.
Of unprecedented proportions. And one of the other things to consider is that why is it that this country, and it's not limited to just this country, but strongly in this country, again, and this is a person from the UK, he got shamed out of the UK to the US and is now living in the US in the South, and is venerated. And they make movies about him. And it's almost like only in the U.S. can the U.S. population, and of course we're talking about a minority of the population, right, but still enough to cause these epidemics that we're seeing, but that there's this level of veneration. And so one of the things that's really interesting, though, is really looking to see who actually are the vaccine deniers. And so you mentioned a name, you said Jenny McCarthy and celebrities. And so so when you look at those people who are under-vaccinated versus non-vaccinated, so let's talk about two different groups of people. So those that are under-vaccinated are, so those that are mostly, so again, we're talking about minorities of people, those that are not vaccinated. But when you look at the under-vaccinated folks, those are people that you may, kind of have the demographics that don't have access to healthcare, have difficult time getting to healthcare, lower income, single parent home. I mean, the typical things that we see with, that's under vaccinated. These are still folks that still work very hard to get children vaccinated. Right. When you're looking at those that are not vaccinated, you're really looking at a different group of people. You're looking at a privileged group of people. So you're looking at people that have college educations plus. You're looking at groups of individuals that have mean incomes over $75,000 to $100,000, and you're looking at folks that are mostly white. And you're also, when you look at those people, in particular, what you're seeing is that those are individuals that also don't get their primary health information from the CDC. They don't list a primary physician as their primary care provider. So these are folks that are getting their health information from kind of unscrupulous, if you will, pseudoscience, as you had mentioned, websites, social media sites, this sort of stuff. And they're also going to a non-physician, and by physician, I'm not, I'm talking about non-medical, the kind of standard medical. I mean, of course, a nurse practitioner, family doc, all that stuff. They're not going to those folks. They're seeing alternative healers, pseudo medicine, if you will. And when you look at that group of people, those are the folks that are not getting their children vaccinated. So they're not exposing. These are otherwise well-to-do people who are not going to see. They're not seeking care from the standard medical world, and they're also seeking their information from otherwise non-medical related sources. So essentially pseudoscience. And
again, we're talking with Dr. MarkAlain Dery about the anti-vaxxers, as they're popularly known, and the harm that they cause. I don't mean this to sound insensitive, but as someone who studies sociology, it's actually a fascinating phenomenon. I mean, it is, because when we think about anti-science, we think about a certain segment of the population that might be Trump supporting, might
Sure.
be, you know, certain,
Sure.
when we think about fake news, same thing. This is both anti-science and fake news, yet it's a phenomenon of privilege, it's a phenomenon of educated people, it's a phenomenon of relatively well-to-do people. So, you know, I can't help but wonder what's behind it. And my impression is that one of the things that's behind it is a sort of perversion of a healthy skepticism. And by that I mean, for example, the very few anti-vaxxers I've met have said things to me like, "Oh, what, you trust the drug companies?" And of course, a big chunk of my chest-thumping career is big pharma greed, and big pharma is evil. So of course I don't trust the drug companies. If this were in my language, I'd say they're tools of Satan. So I don't. But on the other hand, I do trust scientists, by and large.
You know, it's a perverse thing when we're actually having to support the big pharma in that case.
Yeah, well,
right?
in that sense.
Yes, when we're in that setting, because I'm with you. I have a healthy skepticism of big pharma, but when I'm put in a position where I'm now supporting big pharma, but I'm like you, I actually trust the CDC. Right? I mean, I have my issues with the CDC as a professional who works in that world, you know, but they're not out there to try to fool anybody. You know, they're not out there to try to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. Nobody is at the CDC and at the various scientific institutions that study vaccines. There's nobody there that's actually trying to do anything harmful. These are really, truly public servants that are actually trying to do the right thing for the public.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I guess what I'm trying to get at here is, you know, epidemiology, which is if you know, you've studied, you're expert in epidemiology. You look for the vectors that are introducing the disease. You look for the patterns of dissemination and distribution and so on. This is a social problem, so it's a social epidemiology that's called for here. We have some vectors in these educated people, but what makes people susceptible? And it seems to me a certain privilege. You mentioned the word privilege, but also a certain, I would guess, and I don't know if there's data on this, but I would guess these people in some ways are ideologically closer to you and I than you might think. I suspect that they're progressive in many ways.
Very progressive.
So somehow they just, but I think what they've fallen prey to is the same thing that causes people on the right to fall prey to fake news conspiracy theories.
So let me give you an example. So I have been thinking about this as I was prepping for this, and I think about the anti-vaxxers pretty regularly, and I don't know why I never thought about this before, but climate change deniers.
Right.
No matter how much science you show them, there's nothing that you're going to do that's going to change your mind. And even better than climate science deniers, because they may have a financial, reason to not believe in the science. When you look at individuals that are gun right folks, and you try to share with them the damage that gun violence has onto our society, again, there's that same level of just ignoring that data. And so I've been kicking it around a lot, trying to understand what is this phenomenon. Are we at a point in our humanity? And let's be very clear, vaccines and clean water, those are the two things that have allowed humanity to progress, that have extended our lifespan. We are not creatures that were meant to probably live beyond 40 or 50 years old, right? So, and you can tell because our bones get old as we turn 15, 16, what have you. The fact that we're able to have life expectancies into the 70s is clearly a result of our environment. We've been able to manage our environment. So climate change is likely changing that. And then, of course, vaccines, and the fact that people are not being vaccinated is somewhat problematic as well. And what is that sociology behind that? I don't know. I don't know why people don't believe in it. I'm an epidemiologist. I believe the science, and I'm grateful that I can talk to doctors about this, because doctors will listen. But one of the things that I was reviewing before I came in was that younger doctors are actually skeptical of vaccines.
Oh, really?
Yes. So it's a function of, they're more skeptical than older doctors, and it's likely the fact, and we saw this with the HIV world as well. is that as people stopped dying of AIDS, right, you had a lot of the young MSM, men who have sex with men, they stopped kind of, you know, in the late 90s, there was this resurgence of HIV amongst the MSM population because they didn't see a lot of that HIV and AIDS that happened in the 80s and the 90s. The younger generation never saw it, so they were not necessarily their behaviors weren't driven as a result of that fear from having seen all these young people die. And I'm wondering if we're seeing something like that now. We're almost a victim of our own success to a certain degree.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting point. The other dimension, we're almost out of time, so we're not going to be able to explore all the dimensions of this. But I went to South Africa to write about the AIDS epidemic there, where another form of anti-science, multiple forms, including local healer practitioners at the village level, and I went to villages resisting the notion that AIDS can be treated with pharmaceuticals, as well as the government itself denying that, and the horrific toll of that. And also, by the way, one of the reasons the piece wasn't published was because some of the horrifying things that happened in terms of child rapes and so on, because of superstitions. So, but the other dimension of it that so I know that pseudoscience does horrible things to the human beings. But the other, and we only have about 30 seconds, but the other dimension of this that perhaps we'll have you back on to explore it sometimes is that it also, we live in a culture of that emphasizes individual rights.
And that's the
and people will say, hey, if I don't want to vaccinate my kid, I don't have to. Right. But your kid is going to be in a school with 500 other people's kids. And if those kids get sick, you don't have the right. Why do we always talk about individual rights but never about individual responsibilities?
Yes, that is without question. I think, personally, I think that this has been this is how our country was founded, on this streak of liberty and independence. And when you look at gun violence as a result of individuals that have guns, and I think that when you look at vaccines, and the fact that a parent has a right to not vaccinate their children, I think that those are areas that we're going to see this idea of staunch independence is going to catch up with us very, very quickly, and it's something that I'm concerned about.
And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but we have to keep talking about this because this is a huge issue, and this is one of the major frontiers of improving American health. So Dr. MarkAlain Dery, as always, great to talk to you,
RJ.
and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much.